there. So this is my SPSS tutorial for Thursday, November 5th. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to conduct a one sample t-test on with SPSS. Okay, so let's review for ourselves the criteria under which you would conduct a one sample t-test, right? So you would conduct a one sample t-test when you have a sample mean and a sample standard deviation, and you're trying to determine if your sample mean is significantly different than your population mean, your hypothesized population mean, okay? Other criteria that you should keep in mind are that your sample size is less than 30. So you have less than 30 observations in your sample data set. And you also want to make sure that your variable of interest is continuous and not categorical. Okay, so if you're looking at age or IQ or something like that, as opposed to gender or political affiliation or something like that. So those are our requirements. And for today's tutorial, we are going to be looking at whether students at Made Up University watch less television than college students overall in the US population, okay? So that is our hypothesis. That is a directional hypothesis, okay? So because we're comparing our sample mean to a population mean, then we're gonna conduct a one sample t-test, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And then we'll open SPSS together and open our data set together. Okay, so I already have it up here, but I'm going to pretend like I don't. And I'm going to click open. Okay, well, it just opened, but you would select the file. So you would go to Canvas and download the college GPA data set. And make sure you download it and save it onto your desktop so that you can open it in SPSS, because it won't open if you just try to open it in Canvas, okay? So go ahead and get your data set opened. And first we'll hop over here to variable view, and you'll see that we have 4 different variables. So we have college GPA, high school GPA, SAT score, and hours of TV. Okay, so the variable that we're interested in for our test today is hours of TV watched per week. Okay, and then in data view, we see our actual data for each of those variables, and we see that our sample size is 20 because we have 20 observations here. Okay, all right, so we are ready to conduct our one sample t-test. And I have 3 dogs with me right now, so if you hear like feet, you know, little dog feet, I apologize. So we're ready to conduct our one sample t-test. So we're going to go up here to Analyze, and we're going to go to Compare Means, and we're going to select one sample t-test, okay? And we're going to select our variable, our test variable, which is hours of TV per week, okay? And lastly, for test value, we're gonna put in our population mean, or hypothesized population mean, which is 8 hours of TV, okay? And then we just click OK here, and that gives us our output, okay? So in the first table there, it says one sample statistics, right? So what that means is first we have, for our sample of the students at Made Up University, we've got our sample size, which is N, okay? So we've got 20 observations or 20 students. We've got our sample mean of 6.65. We've got our sample standard deviation of 2.73. And then we also, SPSS was kind enough to conduct the standard error for us, right? Which we know goes into the one sample t calculation and tells us what difference, the size of difference we would expect, or the difference we would expect between the population and the sample due to random chance alone. Okay, so that's our first table, our one sample statistic. If we go down here to one sample t-test, or one sample test, we can see our obtained t-statistic, right? So our obtained t-statistic is negative 2.204, and our degrees of freedom is 19, which is again just the sample size minus 1, so 20 minus 1 is 19, okay? So you might think, based on my lecture on how to conduct a one sample t-test, right, that what you would do now is you would take your obtained t and your degrees of freedom and your alpha level, which is 0.05, and the fact that this is a directional hypothesis because we're assuming that that students at made-up university watch less TV than students in the US population, right? But we actually don't need to do that, okay? So we don't need to do that because SPSS has the significance value, right? So we have our significance value here, which is essentially our p-value. Okay, so our p-value is 0.04. Okay, so all we need to know is that we've set our alpha level to 0.05. So, or our p-value criterion to 0.05. So if our obtained p-value or significance level here is 0.04, okay, then that means that we can reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a significant difference between our sample or our sample of students from made-up university and the US population. Okay, so we do not, whenever we do SPSS, we do not need our critical value to tell us whether p is less than or greater than 0.05. We can just look at the significance level here. Okay, so we have our results. We know that students who attend made-up university watch fewer hours of television than college students in the US population. Okay, so now we are ready to write up our results. Okay, so I've given you the example here of how to write up your results in APA style. So that a couple things are a little bit different than what I showed you in class. The first is that we have a hypothesis, okay? And you should always state the hypothesis first if you can, okay? So we would say, we hypothesize that students from made-up university watch fewer hours of TV per week than the average college students or students in the US population, okay? And then next we would want to indicate, what type of statistical test we have conducted. So we've conducted a one sample t-test, and we would also want to include what our t-test, what we found when we conducted our t-test. So we want to include our obtained t-statistic, okay, which is the negative 2.204. We want to include our degrees of freedom and parentheses, and we would want to include the p-value that we obtained, okay? So we have our t-statistic, our degrees of freedom in parentheses, and our p-value, okay? And then we want to have a conclusion of sorts where we interpret those results, particularly in reference to our hypothesis. So we might say something like, in support of our hypothesis or consistent with our hypothesis, students from made-up university, okay, watched significantly fewer hours of television than the average US college student, okay? And then for that summary sentence or concluding sentence, we would also include descriptive statistics, right? So we would include our sample mean, our sample standard deviation, and we would also include our population mean. And it's also relevant to include our sample size, okay? So all of those would be in there. Your sample mean, sample standard deviation, population mean, and your sample size, okay? So a couple of other things that I point out on the handout is we want to start by explicitly stating our hypotheses. We want to name the tests that we conducted and also provide the statistics that we obtained when we conducted that test. So things like our obtained t-value, degrees of freedom, and our p-value. And then we would want to describe our results in that concluding sentence with our descriptive statistics, our sample size, sample mean and sample standard deviation, and our population value. And then just some punctuation things. Make sure that you are italicizing all of your statistics. So your sample mean and your mu symbol, those should all be italicized. Or actually, not your mu symbol, but your mean and your n and your standard deviation, okay? And you also always want to round to 2 decimal places when you're reporting your descriptive statistics, but round to 3 places when you're talking about your p-value, okay? All right, so once you are done in your groups, working through this tutorial, all that you'll need to upload is your output, so your table, all of the tables that we've obtained, and you'll be finished. And then you'll be ready to work on your homework 4, which will allow you to practice calculating one sample t-test by hand and also calculating them on SPSS. Okay, so as always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to seeing you soon. All right, bye guys.